So there's two kind of washes. There is a plain regular wash, and then there's what's called a gradated wash, or like a gradual wash. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is just get some color ready to go. I already have this green here, so I'm just going to go ahead and use it. Remember that when you're mixing your colors, I want you to practice making unique colors. So not just straight from the pan. I want you to practice trying to do like shading. So like I could make this green darker by adding red to it. Or I could change the green a little bit so it's like a blue-green. But I'm changing the color so that way it's not just straight from the pan. Okay, and then when I go in to start a wash, so I'm going to do like a square again this time. So a wash, generally you want your paper almost on a little bit of a tilt, but I cannot do that right now. With my setup, it's a little crazy. I guess I could put something underneath to make it tilt a little bit. You just won't be able to see my pan, so I apologize about that. Okay, so my paper's on a slight tilt, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and lay down my color. So it's pretty, like, I guess not thick because it's watery, but it's very watery. And what I'm going to do is I'm making sure that my brush is very loaded every time. Oh, I should spotlight. So I'm loading it up so that there's a lot of water every single time I make a line. And then I'm just going to continue to make a line right below my last line. And I'm filling up my brush either every time or every other time. And you can see the paint will follow my brush and like move down the paper. And that's why having it at a slight tilt helps. So a wash is good if you're trying to fill like a whole background in, rather than trying to just like pretend this is the background of a picture. Rather than me just trying to like paint like this, I'm going to end up with weird brush marks. I won't have even areas. Some areas might be darker than the other. A wash is going to give you a nice even coverage. And it can help you out when you're doing like big backgrounds, or if you're trying to lay down like a base color in an object or in your background. Okay, so I'm going to stop with that. So this is just a basic wash, and I'm actually going to label it for you guys. And I'll take pictures and put these in Google Classroom as well, so you have them as a reference. So the next kind of wash is a like gradual wash, or a gradient wash. So I'm gonna mix up some more color. I'm gonna do a different color this time. So a gradual wash, it's gonna start the same way. I'm gonna have my line of color at the top. I'm gonna make sure it's really saturated. You can kind of see like the water, it's very dark, or the color is very dark. Then what I'm gonna do is, with my brush loaded with that color, instead of drawing or like painting the next line next to it, I'm gonna dip my brush in a little bit of water. Like I didn't dunk the whole thing in the water, I just did like just the very top of the brush. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint that line right below it. And I'm gonna like dot off my brush, so this is my napkin. I'm just gonna like touch it real quick, get some of that water off, and then reload it with a little bit more water. Do that again, and just keep doing that over and over. And what it's doing is it is diluting the paint so that it's getting lighter and lighter. So when we talked about value and doing those value scales, that's essentially what I'm doing right now. So I'm going from like a dark purpley color to a light purple. This one I'm going to try to show you my pan while I'm doing it because, okay, so I have my purple here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same color again. I'm going to load up that purple. And then instead of adding water to the purple, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to add some blue to my purple color up here. So I'm just going to do a little bit of blue, mix it in, and then start dragging that down. Take a little bit more blue, mix it in, and drag it down, and just continue to do that. Okay, so we are going to do a wet into wet. So I'm going to get two colors going again. I'm going to start off with this blue. Remember, so the two different ways you can do wet into wet is you can either lay down a color and then start to drop in other colors with it, or you can start off with just plain water and then drop the colors into the water. So I'm just going to start with pure color, put some blue down, clean my brush off, and then I'm going to pick up some, let's do some lighter blue. So I'm working with like very wet colors, as I'm sure you can tell from the name wet to wet. You want to make sure that your watercolor is very wet. Drop some purple. Oh, that didn't come out very well. And you'll see the color start to like bleed into the other colors. You could add some water to help it bleed a little bit more. There is a point where you just have to stop though, because if you just continue to add in colors, it'll just get very muddled and it won't look great. So you have to like stop for a couple minutes, let it dry, and then you can do another layer on top of it. That's kind of the nice thing about watercolor is it always looks darker when you're painting, but when it dries, it'll turn much lighter. So when we start our projects in watercolor, you guys are going to end up doing multiple layers for one object. Okay, so now that I have my wet into wet down, you can see it's just like, it all kind of like blends together. It just like gently shifts from color to color. So what I'm going to do now is I just have salt. It's just like from my kitchen. You can use like coarse or non-coarse. It's pretty much whatever you have. You don't need a lot of it. So I've got the salt in my hand. And what I'm going to do is, while this is still very wet, I'm going to drop some salt on top of it, especially in like the darker parts. And you always want to put the salt on last. You don't want to put the salt on and then add more paint. The salt ends up reacting with the paint and it soaks up some of the pigment. So later today, when this dries, I could go back in and like I'll have to physically like brush the salt off because it ends up kind of sticking to the paper, but it'll leave these cool little like crystal effects. So I'm gonna do another one next to it so you guys can see that one too. I feel like the darker the color is, the better the salt ends up looking. And you have to make sure that it's like still very wet when you do it. I'm just gonna do that. Also put some salt on it. And you can already see, like, even when I drop the salt on there, how the salt like starts to pick up some of the pigment. Okay, but that's all we have time for today.